evening and welcome to Season 8, Episode 10 of Inside the Rookery, Channeling Creativity with the Rooks. It should have been all four of us tonight, but sadly Andy Law took a turn for the worse after doing a marathon Lawhammer session last night.
You overdid it.
And so I have banished him to bed with all sorts of lemsips and pills. So it's the three of us, but we've got loads of questions pre-submitted by our lovely community as usual. And please chip in the comments and the chat and I'll bring them up on screen. I apologise in advance if I have some echoing. I'm on the big boss chair and in his absence, I have fumbled my way through the technical setup and I'm currently working with a temporary arrangement where my sound is coming through my phone and these headphones that are Bluetooth to my phone, and the mic is not Andy's mic, it's some other mic in this setup. So we'll see how we go.
I mean, really, you're demonstrating kind of being creative just with how you've approached the technology tonight.
There you go.
I have, yeah. It was a last minute. What the fuck am I going to do? Right, Bluetooth, that'll do. My cat headphones will come to the rescue once again. So welcome to the stream, Andy Lees, writer and educator, and Mark Gibbons, our resident seer and artiste extraordinaire. Get the French right, Lindsay.
Yes.
So before we begin, any chat for me? Any good gossip from this week, Andy and Mark?
What that's fit for broadcasting?
Yes.
No, I don't think so.
No.
No, I guess I'll just give the standard disclaimer. I have like a traditional. It's sort of I'm just gone on holiday from school and have the traditional end of term cold. So I'm a bit hoarse. And if I mute myself and have to kind of blow my nose, I apologize. But I will do that without the mic, so you maybe get the visuals, but you definitely won't get the sound. So.
Excellent. Right, so let's get started. As always, as I said, we've got quite a few questions coming already. So we'll start with one from the redoubtable Sotek. So Sotek asks, what's your favorite form of go-to inspiration when you're having writer/artist block and you feel you need a fresh perspective? Movies, video games, books, etc., etc.
Interesting.
Well, I try and avoid I try and avoid block. I try and avoid the concept of block. I think if I'm pushing an idea and having issues with it, I will set it aside and allow my natural I don't know, juices and enzymes to slowly do their business, and then eventually something will occur. Because I think it's just you've got to give your subconscious or however your process operates the time to do the job. There's nothing worse than sitting down with a blank piece of paper and being told, right, draw this thing now. So I try and avoid that. If I'm not feeling particularly motivated, I will usually go out. I will usually go for some fresh air. I'll usually go for a walk, because I find the ability to sort of switch off that part of my brain and just let my walking muscles kick in and get the sun on my face and stuff. Well, often my subconscious at some point when I'm out for a stroll will pop an idea from the back of my brain into the front of my brain, and I'll go, oh, that was that thing I was thinking about. Oh yeah. Oh. And then by the time I get home, I've got something to draw or something to write or something to think about.
Quite often you'll say to us, Mark, oh, I was out on my walk today and I was thinking about this thing, and you'll have maybe a question or a comment on something one of the others have been doing. And I know Andy Law is not here, but as we're so codependent, I'll just reply for him. And that is that sometimes when he's stuck on a rules question, he'll go for a walk with me and he'll just talk. He'll just kind of chat on. I was about to say witter on.
You were going to say witter, weren't you? You can say witter. He's not here.
Be honest. Come on.
Yeah, he will witter on quite happily, and I'm quite happy to just walk alongside him and listen to the rules, like kind of coming out of his mouth, and him just sort of saying to me, like, this is what, and I'm kind of stuck on this, and I'll come up with like ideas that are usually not helpful, but every now and then it'll spark something, and he'll be like, "Oh, that's what the problem has been, right?" And it usually I adopt the Socratic method by just asking him loads of questions about
Yeah.
what.
If I was in Scotland, we'd be going to the pub a lot, I think, is what would be happening.
Why aren't you in Scotland? Get on a plane.
Excellent question. Excellent question.
Martin says, as a software developer, going on a walk, going home, taking a shower, or even going to sleep never fails to fuel creativity when I'm stuck.
Yeah, you often wake up in the morning or in the middle of the night with an idea, for sure. Yeah, that part of the brain.
Yeah, or like doing something like mechanical. So like similarly walking, but even like things like housework. Like I generally don't like doing housework, but my kitchen is never cleaner than when I'm stuck on what to write next. Because I'll go and I'll just, while I'm doing that manual stuff, some part and listening to music and not really thinking, some part of my brain is kind of working over in the background. So
yeah, it's infinitely preferable to forcing it, which is why the argument I make anytime I've been working sort of in-house anywhere and you're expected to be at your desk at between certain hours. And I frequently find myself, clashing with producers or managers over, what I'm doing any given hour of the day. The fact that I've been up for half the night scribbling down ideas is rarely accepted as an excuse for
sleeping at your desk.
I was going to say pissing about, but yeah, sleeping also would be probably frowned upon.
But I think as well, like on those rare occasions when I felt like I had to, like when there's been a deadline looming. So thinking of like when we're for 4th edition, like if I have to be writing and I'm not feeling it, it's always really useful to me to have more than one thing that I'm writing. So if you're like, well, okay, I can't think, like, I'm stuck. I don't know how to make that adventure hook really pop and really sing. And well, okay, I know I'm going to have to do this section over here. So I'm just going to do the boring mechanical structure of sorting the headers out and putting everything in the right order and not engaging the fun creative part, just doing the mechanical part within the document. And filling in the stuff I already know until such time as I can get it.
I've almost always got ideas, designs, sketches at various stages of development. Everything from loose thumbnails to sort of nearly finished illustrations. Because if the initial inspiration stuff isn't hitting, then I know I can always go in. Oh, I've got to paint this helmet. I'll go and paint this helmet for a bit, because you can kind of disengage the wildly imaginative bit of your brain while you're doing that, which then gives the time to breathe, ideas time to ferment. Yeah. Always good idea to have multiple projects on the go.
And Tom Toner, when we had him on, I really liked his system for like an author, which is he always has like he has his novel that he's writing and the world building that he's doing either for that world or for his other novel on the go. And what he always finds is one of those creative avenues is always clear. So if he's writing the story and he reaches a thorny point in the story, he stops and he disengages and he does the higher level world building and he makes notes on that until he gets stuck, by which point his other one is now working and he goes back to the kind of story. And I thought that's quite a nice productive flow to kind of get into.
Yeah, that's interesting. The next question is from the chat. I'm really interested to hear if anyone has an answer for this. There's a follow-up, so I'll bring it up. So I find myself writing in English when it's about fantasy and such, and English is my second language. This can create a disconnect between what I want to convey and what I think. Any advice about that? And for additional context, mother tongue is Turkish, and the syntax and structure of the language is very difficult to English. Now, I know as an English teacher, Andy, you will have young people for whom English is a second language, but are doing English higher, advanced higher in the Scottish education system. So do you have any thoughts on that?
And particularly for like creative writing, like it is tough because I think like tone like is king in writing, whether you're writing fiction, whether you're writing adventures, like world building, setting, NPCs. Like if it's really dry and boring, people aren't going to enjoy reading it. If you want it to be moving, like it's not like a mathematical process where you can go, I'll use this word and this metaphor and this thing equals sad audience. Like it's more subtle than that. And I think that is an additional challenge. And so often when we're talking about, like, about friends who are like specifically TEFL teachers, so they teach English as a second language, and it is understandably focused on accuracy of grammar and widening vocabulary and things like that. But I think like mainlining what the actual tone is that you're trying to write is hard. And I like, honestly, I often encourage those pupils, if it's in the exam years, when they're younger, you try and get them creative so they can pick up the tone. If it's older in the exam years and they don't have it, I would tend to encourage them to do more discursive writing rather than creative writing, because it's easier to hit upon the tone there. But one of the things I'm absolutely fascinated by, and I don't think anybody has done a big enough study to draw any real conclusions, and my like half-hearted observations based on the handful of students I've taught does not kind of like a statistically significant sample. But I'm always fascinated what the impact is of what the mother tongue is on how somebody writes in English, because I have taught now 3 pupils for whom Gaelic was their first language and English was their second language. All 3 of them, I would say, are in the top 5 creative writers that I have ever taught. In particular, all 3 of them had an innate skill for writing poetry that has been unrivaled by any other student I've ever encountered. Now, I don't know, that could just be a coincidence, because I've only got a statistical sample of 3, that I know that's not enough. But I do wonder if there's something in Gaelic, because it's quite a tonal language and there's that ups and downs. There's something kind of rhythmic to it, like whether because a lot of the way that language is conveyed is through poetry and through song. So whether that then means they've got more of an ear for that kind of thing, I don't know. So I suppose CS, like potentially trying to lean into it a little bit. So writing in English, but finding what it is about your Turkish kind of grammar and syntax, and finding a way to kind of unlock that and think, well, okay, tonally, what I'm writing is sounding like this, so I'll lean into that and I'll write in English in a way that matches that kind of tone, I suppose.
Just a quick point of order, and the spirit of Burns. Burns wrote in Scots, and as far as I'm aware, he couldn't speak Gaelic or write Gaelic.
I don't believe so, no. Yeah. Which
so
I suppose, to be fair, actually, just to clarify, for someone who doesn't live in Scotland, they might not be aware of the difference. Like they might not actually. So like Gaelic being like a different language. So
Gaelic is a Celtic language, and English is obviously a North Germanic language, and Scots is a North Germanic language that has developed alongside modern English. So you've got modern Scots, modern English, and they have a lot of similarities, and there are ongoing debates over whether it's a dialect or a language, but
it's a bloody language.
Most of the stuff I've read recently is very much the academic papers on the side of it's a language, largely because there's Scots literature.
Yeah, exactly. There's no, and the evolution of it's there. The only people who say it's not a language are people engaged in a culture war grift. Academics and linguists all know it's a language. It meets every definition that a language needs.
and its genealogy, as you say, and its development is unquestionably not via modern English.
Yeah, exactly. And there are different syntactic structures, and you know.
Have you taught, Andy? Have you taught any? We talked about the Gaelic speakers. Have you and their affinity for poetry? Have you taught any sort of Romance language as the first, like in Italians or French? Or
probably more Italian and Spanish, particularly. I've taught quite a lot of people for whom like Italian was their first language. I've also separately like taught English as a foreign language to a lot of Italian peoples as well. And I haven't noticed a particular sort of trends that, although there are, like, it is funny, like I'm trying to think now of specific examples, but you do sometimes see, like, if there are patterns for, like, in Spanish, you can often drop the subject of the verb because the ending of the verb tells you if it's I or he or you, so you don't need to say I or he or you just use the verb with the ending. And I have noticed sometimes, like, native Spanish speakers will do that in English, will drop the subjects of the verb, which I suppose, were they to apply that to poetry, might actually have quite an interesting effect, because you can break these kind of rules in poetry. In prose fiction and non-fiction, it gets very confusing very quickly.
I had a French producer. I had a French producer who, when he got excited, would just switch to French, and we had to, like, no, you do. Baby B, you're doing it again. Oh, mon Dieu.
Sorry, my daughter was in La Boheme as like an emergency children's choir with an Italian opera company, and they just spoke Italian the whole time and just kind of like looked at the children and pointed at things, and just like streams of Italian would come out their mouth. Because the children's Italian was so good for the singing, because they had an excellent voice coach. I think they thought they could all speak Italian, but not one of them could speak. Maybe one, maybe Lucy could, but nobody else. For me, I found this question. Sorry.
Well, I was just going to briefly say, remember, Andy and I years ago had a boss who was Spanish, and it was really funny because obviously face-to-face Spanish communication, it's quite voluble, like the arms moving around. It's quite a dynamic thing. And with him, he could only, if he was speaking Spanish, not so much English, but if he was speaking in Spanish, if his hands weren't free, he couldn't speak properly. So if he was carrying something, he'd be almost monosyllabic when you spoke to him. And occasionally he would have to put things down so that he could have like an animated conversation. Or when he was on the phone, he'd have the phone like that and he'd have his hands in his pockets. He'd be pacing around and he'd be like, see. And then when it was his turn to speak, the hands had to come out because it was like, and then this barrage of Spanish. And it was always really funny to watch in the office because you could, sort of tell how the conversation was going without hearing it just by the level of handography going on.
I really connect with this question because when I was learning Norwegian and I was getting a lot of writing challenges from my teacher, I was trying to write stories that were kind of fairy tale-esque in Norwegian, and I just had no clue if how to convey the tone I wanted, how to make it mysterious and haunting. It was so difficult. And then I would read it back and I'd be like, well, I don't know if basically what I've just written is, once upon a time there was a girl. She had a very pretty voice and she sang all the time, which was what I was writing about, like a mermaid that lost her voice. And I just didn't know. It was really, really hard.
Yeah.
And I've started to write in English now, poetry. Well, yeah, kind of skaldic Old Norse poetry, but not like you would in Old Norse. It's quite complicated. So you have to do it like it would be in Old Norse, but in English, so you can swap the word order and use alliteration rather than rhyming and use different kinds of rhyming. And that's been going really well. But I certainly, although I can read Old Norse, I couldn't write the poetry in Old Norse in the same way. I would just be all
you'd have to be stood in a pine forest somewhere in order to really,
or like practice exhaustively for a very long time, because that is one of the things, like there is no substitute for practice. And I know, like, I quite regularly, so when I'm teaching S3 pupils, we tend to teach Romeo and Juliet in S3, and as part of teaching that play we tend to teach the sonnet form. And so they may have encountered sonnets before, but we explicitly teach them how sonnets work and what the structure is, and not just the syllables and the couplets and stuff, but also the volta and the meaning and all that kind of stuff. And what I found, there was one particularly memorable year, and people out there who are old enough will have gone through this, and people who are younger, trust me, it will happen. But when all of your friends start getting married all at once, and you have like lots of weddings to go to, and I had something like 7 in a year, and at the first one, the bride. So when there's like a guest book goes around for people to sign, and the bride challenged me to kind of write a poem for them. And I thought, I'm going to show off because I was teaching sonnets at the time. I'm going to write a sonnet. And, it took me probably about 40, 45 minutes, which may have been to do with the amount of wine that I drank. But I wrote the sonnet. I was like, oh, that's fine. At which point, some of the other friends who were there, who also were getting married later, said, well, you're going to have to do one for us now too. And so over the course of that year, I was just writing so many sonnets. But by the end of it, like the last couple, I knocked them out in like under 10 minutes because I had just internalized the rhythm. I'd internalized the structure. So I was just writing lines, and they were 10 syllables of iambic pentameter.
Apparently, that's exactly what happened with Shakespeare. He just kept getting invited to bloody weddings.
Yeah, I can believe it.
147 sonnets later, or whatever it is.
I'm glad Shakespeare came up, because in the question thread, I did say that one of your creative processes was Shakespeare on a Ouija board. So
yeah.
Yeah, to be honest, most Western languages have subject verb object structure. Turkish is subject object verb structure and the suffix language. I would say the only two practical things I can think of is don't write it in English, write it in Turkish, translate it, and get a writing partner to say, this is how I've translated it, but do you have any ideas on how I can fit the tone? Because that's one of the struggles I find with Norwegian is in English, I know 15 words that have subtly different meanings to mean one thing, and I can pick the right one, or if I've used that one already, I'm like, I'll play around and just like see which one feels right, which I can't do in Norwegian, but I could do it in Norwegian if I'd written it in English, translated it into Norwegian, had someone else who could speak Norwegian and could chat about it. So if that is an option for you, I know it sounds complicated, but writing partners are great.
It would be really interesting to get a translator on actually one of these to chat with them, because it is. I remember once teaching Chronicle of Death Foretold, the Marquez novel, and I was teaching the English translation of it, but I had a pupil who was also doing like a high level Spanish course, and just for fun, he picked up a copy of it in Spanish, and it was really useful. Every now and then, if we were really getting into the language, we're like, okay, Hamish, what does the Spanish version say? And it was really interesting. What the translator had added was exactly that, Lindsay, was exactly that nuance. So like there's a bit describing Angela Vicario's mother, and it talked about how she had raised her daughters to suffer, but the word in the English translation was reared her daughters to suffer, which has those slightly more animalistic connotations. But when we went back to the Spanish, it wasn't reared, it was raised. It wasn't a word you'd associate with animals. It was just, and so that was an extra layer of nuance that the translator had added in, which absolutely fit the tone of what Marquez was going for, but was not a literal, like word for word, simple translation. It wasn't a neutral translation. It was a thematically meaning one.
When they started translating some of the earlier translations of Beowulf, like the 19th and 20th centuries, they don't translate it with the alliteration and with the kennings. They translate it very much like so you could understand it, not really as poetry. And I went to see a live performance of Beowulf where he had translated it himself, and he talked about how all of that was so important in the Old English that his translation keeps that authentic feeling, even if that means he's not translating it exactly. So say in the Old English, it would be like the armor would be, I don't know, battle something. In modern English, he chose to translate it as battle bright because you knew you could get that, and it also kept the alliteration, which I found really fascinating and has stuck with me.
And that's a really interesting evolution, because I have somewhere, I don't know where it is anymore, a book that I picked up in a secondhand bookshop in Philadelphia of all places, but it's like an 18th century translation of the Odyssey and the Iliad. But what they did was at that point, they thought they knew what poetry was, and poetry had rhyming couplets. So the whole thing is being translated as rhyming couplets, and it's tonally unlike any other translation I've encountered of the Odyssey and the Iliad. It bears no relation to how like Homer's poetry worked, nor really to what you would kind of want it to be. It's an example of like Georgian poetry. It just happens to be about the story of the Iliad and the Odyssey. It's not by any stretch of the imagination good, but it is interesting. Like it's an interesting artifact to have.
I've kind of gone out of focus. I'm in soft focus now, but I guess that's just my age. I haven't read
Vaseline in the lens. Isn't that in your contract? No.
And 101 Colonel says, imagine trying to read the Klingon translations of Shakespeare. And back here, living in Northern Ireland, and someone breaks out the Ulster Scots and no one can understand them. We'd be fine with the Ulster Scots. It's not too bad.
Yeah, I think we'd cope. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got through one question from the pre-submitted questions. We're doing really well. Sue Edgen asks, I have heard, this is a bit similar. I'll go for another one. Just
to contextualize that was a quote from the Love Song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot, that first one.
We will come back to it because it's a nice question, but it's just quite similar to the last one. So Sotek asks, is there any bad habits in your creative process that you have to watch out for?
Repetition, just doing the same thing again and again. Yeah, if you're in a Sometimes when I move from one piece of art to the next, there'll be a hangover. You know, there'll be some stylistic thing that I used that I've got to watch that I don't use it again, just because almost like the muscle memory kicks in, and you're drawing something. Hang on, I drew that last week, didn't I? Let's not do that. Let's start again. Again, another good reason to have multiple different projects on the go, so you're kind of cleansing your palette as you go. Yeah, very easy to sort of start. Again, another reason not to start with a blank sheet of paper and no idea, because some artists do that. They'll go, "Oh, I'm nothing in my head, blank sheet of paper. I'm just gonna start drawing and seeing what comes out." And some can make that work, but I think the majority of us fall into familiar patterns, and we draw stuff that we've probably drawn before. It's not a great method, I don't think, for come up with anything original. I think you'll just fall back into your habits. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, the big one for RPG writers is avoiding the word "will" in your writing. So it's really natural when you're writing an adventure to be like, well, the PCs will do this. This guy will do that. This guy will do that. A, it gets incredibly repetitive, and B, like, I'm not joking, like it bloats your word count to a ridiculous extent, and you can always take it out. You can always just make it present tense, but you put that future conditional in because that's what you're imagining because it's in the future, but you don't need it. That's something that comes up in the Ludonarrative Dissidents podcast all the time when they're reviewing them, and you know, Scalzi goes mad, and it's like future conditional. So yeah, but Andy has largely beaten that out of me. So I'm not.
Well, imagine if you had a language that just conjugated the future conditional rather than using a modal, a helper verb, whatever. Yeah, that would be exciting.
So what I do still have though is, and this is one that Andy and I clash on quite a lot, is punctuation. I love a semicolon, I love an M dash, and I definitely overuse them, but I don't care. Whereas Andy loves taking them out.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a writer, but I do write stuff for us, and then I will over punctuate because I don't know when to use a comma and when not to, and then just go, there you go, do your thing.
Sort it out. Yeah. No,
I'm not a writer. I'm not a writer.
That's our jobs.
Yeah.
A quick fire round from Caravan. Special pens. So many.
Oh. Hang on.
We got props.
I got this here. This is it's a gun casing with a
Ooh.
Like that. It's like a bolt action biro I got from Tokyo.
It's like the kind of biro a Space Marine would use.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like it.
It's awesome. There you go. So that hangs on the wall behind my desk. So yeah.
I don't think I have any of my. Oh no, I do. Hang on.
I have a lot of stationery, and I do like to write in pencil personally.
These are my favorite brand of pens. I think I'm actually meant to wear Uniball eyes. So these are fans of Lawhammer will see. This is what Kath makes her notes in. And I love them. Particularly, to be honest, I mostly use these for marking people work, but I do also like them for writing and planning. They just write very, very nicely. And Kath only really likes the kind of blue and black ones. So whenever she gets a multi-pack, I get all the pretty colors for doing all my marking with. So delighted.
And then pencil, 5mm mechanical pencil. Currently with two B leads in it on account of the arthritis. The softer leads means I don't have to press as hard. So.
Infinite Saxon says those pens fucking slap. They feel and flow so good. Now I'm imagining like those Gen Z marketing campaigns about that pen. So if someone could make that happen, that would be great.
Yeah. But they genuinely.
I like to write in pencil though, personally, and I like to vary just depending on how I'm feeling, the relative hardness of said pencil.
And I really enjoy these if I'm planning or like making notes. They're really good for writing, but they're also great for annotating because when annotating, it's really hard to get the right level of thickness because we sometimes get there's like really narrow, like 0.5 millimeter, and they're too thin. But like a normal ballpoint is too thick for annotating the margins of a book, whereas this is exactly 100%, the right.
Yeah. A normal ballpoint would be too thick for that. I can see that.
What do I use for normal pen? Oh yeah, I got like gel. I do like gel rollers.
Yeah,
I think.
Oh God, my eyes are.
I don't know.
I'm away from all my stationery, or I would show you a selection of things that I like to write with.
I imagine it's a massive quill, some Raven's quill for you,
Yeah.
Lindsay.
Oh, on that note, Suejin challenged us to brainstorm how to make ink out of thistles. Because when I said that you Ouija board Shakespeare, I said that Andy Law got all his mapping talent from being locked in a fairy mountain and forced to be a cartographer with tweezel, what are they called? Teasel quills and thistle ink. So
yeah.
Well,
I mean, surely following our chat with Anna James a few weeks ago, you make a bargain with the gentleman with thistledown hair, and he provides the ink for you, right? Like that's the.
I actually think I know a little bit about making ink, and actually, it's not really a very exciting answer. It's that you boil the purple thistle tops, you probably put something to preserve it in and to bring it out a bit more, and then you use a binder. Job done. And it probably makes a really horrible pale brownish color. It won't be very purple. So that's your answer.
There you go.
In the ads, the pens walk up to RPG designers and slap them across the face. Okay.
Or we get like peppered with them, like Boromir at the end of the Fellowship of the Ring.
Here's
Spoilers.
The second quickfire round. Caravan asks, music whilst working?
For me, it depends what I'm doing. If I'm in the concept phase, or if I'm writing anything, it can't be music with words. It can just be background soundy stuff, like soundtracks and things like that. But if I'm in the coloring in phase, then yeah, if movies and TV, anything, yeah, music sometimes, audiobooks a lot. Yeah, I don't like working. I got tinnitus, which means I've got constant ringing in my ears, so I like to drown that out to some extent. But it's dependent on what I'm doing as to how much drowning out is required. Sometimes just a bit of background noise would be all right. It's always all I can cope with. Sometimes it's like if I'm just got to color this bit in, then I can have metal playing or movies going or whatever I want.
Like similarly, if I'm writing, if I'm listening to something with words, it just distracts me because it's using that bit of my brain. I can't help but listen to the words, and then it's counterproductive. So like I do, like very often the Lord of the Rings soundtrack is the main one because I've got the playlist, which is the full extended versions and also all the Hobbits as well. So I mean that's like, I don't know, like 40 hours worth of music or something.
I'm listening right now. I'm listening to Andy Serkis read all 3 unabridged Lord of the Rings.
Nice.
And he's in full circus mode, as you can imagine. He's doing all the voices.
He's never going to half-heart it. No.
He has overdone it a little bit. He's got Beregond and his son in Minas Tirith, and he's made them Scousers, which is very distracting. I know you can do a good Scouse accent, Andy, but I mean, come on, what are the Scousers doing in Minas Tirith?
Because we all know that they're in Hockland, right?
Yeah.
What I will say is there are a few. So what was interesting, like when we were doing lots of stuff on 4th edition, Lindsay, like even though it's very wordy, the Hamilton soundtrack was what we listened to a lot, which shouldn't be because it's so wordy. But I wonder if it was so wordy and so rapid fire that we almost didn't fully hear the words. And then every now and then when we paused, we'd have a nice little thing to listen to, but then we'd get back into the rhythm maybe.
Yeah, it was also, some of it like really pumps you up, and we were working against pretty tight deadlines towards the end of that project, so that it was very helpful for that. Like it almost is the kind of music that makes you feel like you're moving and walking around when you're sitting down.
Yeah. And the one other album with words that I can listen to when I'm writing or indeed marking, because it's the same thing when I'm marking students' work. Like if I'm listening to something with words, I'm not reading properly. And it's a very dubious honor because it means this album is essentially sonic wallpaper that I don't listen to. But the album Feeling Strangely Fine by Semisonic, which has like Secret Smile and Closing Time on it and stuff like that. Very mediocre album. Apologies if there's any fans out there. But something about that album, if it's on, I'm not really hearing it. So I find it's quite good. If I need something vaguely uplifting, I can just pop that on, but I don't really listen to it. It just serves as, like I say, sonic wallpaper. So.
There's a lot of that out there.
Yeah.
I like music while working.
Yeah, I think the
Like,
difference. Sorry, I was going to say, like, there is a lot of sonic wallpaper there, but I don't listen to a lot of it. I think that's the only one that's in my music collection, if that makes sense. That I've listened to the songs enough that they're familiar, but they're bland enough that I don't care. Whereas most of the stuff is bland enough I don't care, I don't listen to. So yeah.
Yeah, I feel a bit like, for me, that music, even music with words, triggers a different bit of headspace than the bit of my brain that makes up words. So for me, it's not that distracting. It's almost like what I was saying about Hamilton feeling physical. It's almost like physically a bit of me is like singing along with the music, but my brain's fully on the words that I'm writing in a weird way.
I like Schmidt's comment, actually. I don't know if you want to bring it up, but about music in a foreign language, because that is something I have occasionally listened to. If you've never listened to French rap, it is brilliant. There's something about the mellifluous flow of the French language in rap form. It's beautiful and slightly mesmerizing. But because I do speak French, but not well enough to follow the speed that they're rapping at, that it just becomes like noise. And I have like randomly listened to, I think it was Turkish music. I'm not sure, but like something got recommended on Flow, and I was like, I can't make out those words. Great, let that play. But
it's not. I don't. It sometimes will work, but Heilung, who are I was going to say Scandinavian, but the Scandinavian and German. It's sort of old Northern European pagan music, effectively. So their stuff, I tend to listen to that when I'm doing a bit of yoga, burn some incense and get my Highland on. Yeah.
For me, it's the other way round. So, well, if it's a completely unknown language, it might be fine. But if it's a language that I know a few words of, and there's now quite a few of those, I'll just spend my time trying to work out if I can translate it and if I know any of it. So like French would be no good, and Norwegian would be good. In fact, none of the Scandinavian languages would be all right. German wouldn't be any good. Spanish, Italian, like basically any Romance language out. Gaelic would be fine because I know very little Gaelic.
You should try French rap. I'm telling you.
I'll try it. I'm willing to be convinced. And 101 Colonel says, I don't imagine any of the guys here listen to something like Slayer while working.
I mean, Metallica, Rammstein, Slayer is the one band everybody assumes I should like Slayer, and it's like they just one increment beyond outside of my taste, just a little too heavy for me. Yeah, but again, if I'm coloring in, and if I'm coloring in some dark, scary stuff, then a bit of thrash is fine.
Yeah.
Nice.
Okay, so Oxycutor asks, even though it's a creative process, do you use agile methods to develop the work to keep projects going?
You mean as in the software, that kind of stuff?
I think he means like rather than a waterfall project where the agile project where you have like incremental deliveries all the way through. I presume that's what Oxycutor means, which actually goes back to what you were talking about before, Mark, where you might move between streams of work.
We've attempted to introduce some sort of structure into our processes, but so far without much success. We will have to. I think the honeymoon period is very much coming to an end, and I think at some point we are going to have to knuckle down and have charts and whiteboards and stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting because in software development, you'll have like, how do you know the definition of done? So what is the definition of done is what you need to talk about first before you can consider whether agile methods are appropriate to your publication style. Like, I guess you could say that in the RPG industry, you'd be following an agile approach if you say released 10 small PDF chapters and then at the end package them all up and publish them printed. Like, I can see that, but it comes down to, for me, definition of done. And a lot of people who say, yeah, I'm doing agile in this field that's outside of software development aren't really. They're just trying to say we're doing what we've always done, but we're trying to do it more quickly. So
yeah, I mean, I think certainly, I think if we find us, hopefully we inevitably find ourselves working with outside studios and freelancers, and I think there'd be a need for structure. But at the moment, with the four of us, we kind of, everybody's wearing so many hats, and we're kind of winging it, and it's created a protracted process, not very efficient, and I think, as I said, that we're going to have to knuckle down and introduce structure and process. And though we may rail against it a little bit, I think in order to get stuff done on time, or vaguely on time, whatever that might be, I think there's going to need to be, we're learning the hard way. Okay, I mean, I'm learning as an artist. Okay, I can't spend as much time doing that, but I should spend time doing that. Okay, let's do less of this. Let's do a bit more of that. Let's change the way I approach.
Yeah, and I think like a Kanban style of project management and managing work can work really well. So you've got your backlog, you've got your you can swap it between a small team. I think that would really work. Yeah, Martin says, I would expect any small project with only 1 or 2 people is automatically agile. Big planning is only necessary with large projects and groups. Yeah, I just feel a little bit like a few years ago, agile was the thing in software development. And in software development, you can say, right, I want to develop a new banking app next year, but actually I'm not going to do a big release next year. I'm going to release 10 different incremental updates to that app to release features to customers through the course of the year. And then suddenly everyone was like, see what they do in software development. I want to do it in everything. Like, it became the real corporate buzzword in a way that just made me go a bit like, yeah, but do you actually understand what it does in software development? Or do you literally just want things done more quickly? Because that's a totally different question and process. Let's go back to a Suejan one. Let's go back to this one. So Suejan asks, I have heard the mermaid singing each to each. I do not think that they will sing to me. How do you each stir up the creative juices, hear the muse speak more clearly?
Interesting. I mean, like, well, I don't know, because it does sort of tie in to sort of Sotek's first question about combating block, like, because what he was sort of suggesting in terms of the idea that you would go to like a book or like read something or play something to clear a block, and like that's like the opposite of what I would want to do, because I think I'd start becoming derivative. Like, if I'm struggling with what to write, I don't go read someone else's words, because I'll write their words. I won't write my words. And like for me, like in terms of like where a lot of the first ideas come from. So I have a weird thing. I struggled for a very long time with insomnia. Like, I really struggled to get to sleep because I just couldn't switch my brain off. It just wouldn't stop. And as well as kind of working on like sleep hygiene and kind of various things like that, one of the things I do, and I've told Lindsay this before, and you thought I was mad, but like I like to basically like make up stories in my head rather, while I'm in my bed, to kind of make myself fall asleep. And they tend to have to be stories that involve somebody falling asleep unhelpfully. But sometimes it's a very long and circuitous route to kind of get to that point. And that's where like lots of like little germs of ideas will form, that then later on when I'm writing something else will be like, oh, that name that I used, or that scene that I used, or that line of dialogue that popped into my brain, or whatever will make its way into something else. And I almost wonder if it's like part of my like dream brain engaging before I actually fall asleep.
I mean, you're right. If you're sort of stuck, then you're reading a book or watching a movie or something like that, it can be, you do run the risk of creating something derivative, but at the same time you want to have a massive library of all that kind of stuff to draw upon. So it's kind of picking
before, but
yes,
not
exactly.
Yeah.
I think like sorry, Mark.
Go on.
And the liminal space, like between awake and asleep, is like the twilight of the mind, and like your brain, certainly my brain, starts to dream a little bit, and it does feel a bit like that, like it's, but I'm still sort of thinking, but then if you look at it too closely, and if you start to consciously think, oh, I think I might be starting to dream and fall asleep, you'll just like then wake up and the process is broken. So it's quite like the flow mindset, the state of mind called flow that Mikhail Csikszentmihalyi first started writing about, maybe like in the 70s, the 80s. And back then it was associated with the field of psychology that was about anomalous experience, and it was like guys in the 60s in Californian universities like inducing hallucinations. But he started doing work on this thing called flow state, which is easier to describe than to teach someone how to go into it. And it's just like that state of mind where you know what you're doing and you're highly attentive to what you're doing, but you're also not thinking at all about what you're doing, and it's just coming really easily and just flowing. And artists have it, athletes have it, and you'll both, I'm sure, have experienced it and know what I mean. And people do, they're like, yeah, I know what that is, but it's a really hard state of mind to teach someone how to get into. Because it's like, well, you just do the thing that you know you can do, you like doing, you're good at doing, and you'll just like get there.
Yeah. It was a couple of years back. I read an interview with John Blanche, and somebody said, "So, what kind of new young artists do you look at? Who do you admire today?" And John's like, "I don't look at anybody. I don't look at anybody's work because I don't want to be influenced by them." And it was such a for the person asking the question, was such a kind of almost slap in the face. It was like, but social media and ArtStation and don't we all look at each other's art the whole time? And I was like, no, don't look at any of it. And I were like, wow, man. I mean, to be that sure of yourself and of your own work and know your style so well that I don't need to look at anybody else's stuff. And it's not from a position of sort of any kind of arrogance in John's. It's just he knows his stuff. He knows what he wants to do. He doesn't want to find himself influenced by anybody else. He just wants to make his own thing, like the good old days, Yeah,
and his style is so unique and so recognizably his style as well, that you can see that he wouldn't want to erode that, because that's like, I don't want to use the corporate word, but that is like his brand, is that very particular style he has. And I suppose that the fear for someone like that, who's known for that style, if you were to start being influenced by others and lose that style, he loses.
I have to remind myself that comparison is the death of joy, and it is. I take less pleasure in my work these days. I'm less confident about it than I was in my 20s. But that was like the confidence of youth has eroded. But I do find myself looking fondly back on those days when I would do some terrible piece of anatomy and didn't really care and just move on to the next piece. Now I agonize over every pencil line. So I want to make sure it's right because people will look at this, Whereas before I didn't care, didn't matter,
So
that would be an interesting separate stream topic. Would be the things that we've done that we regret artistically.
Oh God!
Mine is, I'll complain about mine. Mine is that we didn't clock when we were doing the starter set for Wifrit 4 that when you talk about timber and lath buildings, that's spelled differently from lathe, the woodworking instrument, and every single one has the E on the end of it, which is the woodworking instrument. And somebody did like a really funny meme of like all these fantasy buildings with like lathes kind of stuck on the walls. And it's just a simple, like, we went the wrong way with spell check, and it just
man.
So I bear that shame.
So Sotek asks, why is it important to you to go against the common grain, challenge conventions, or attempt to give voice to those that rarely have one? For me, the first two parts, because it's boring if you don't go against the common grain or challenge convention. And the second part, because it's just the right thing to do as a responsible
there's a
creator.
division between the two. Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting. I agree that, like, I'm not like the last part. You're absolutely right. It's just the moral thing to do. So I'm not even going to discuss that. But on the first two, what I think is interesting, I this is why I think Andy and I do our best work together, because he very much leans into the doing something unusual or new or different or twisting or subverting it, which I think can often be very, very good. But I think unfettered, that can sometimes be problematic. I think there are aspects of classic storytelling structure that you need to remember. And if you set something up, you need to pay it off. Maybe not pay it off in the expected way, but you do need to pay it off. And because I lean so much into classic storytelling structure or classic tragic arcs or things like that, between the two of us, we end up, I think, with exactly the right kind of like balance, sort of in between the two.
Yeah, I like to sort of work within conventional structure and conventional ideas, but just nudge it, because I think there's people enjoy that. People kind of want some familiarity sometimes, but then you sort of confound the expectations a little bit rather than going mad and crazy from the get-go. I think you just lose an audience then. I think it's good to nod and acknowledge the structure and the convention, but then surprise people here and there, push against it.
There's a philosopher, I think Hutchison was his name, and he was writing, I think he was writing about visual art, but it applies to music, and I think it applies to storytelling as well. And he talked about, like, the key being, and I can't remember which round it was, it's either uniformity amidst variety or variety amidst uniformity. It's one or the other. But he talked about, like, because he was about aesthetics in visual art, and he was like, a sea of flat green is boring. But you look out over a forest, which is all these different shades of green. They're all green, but they're all slightly different. That's beautiful. And that was like the metaphor he used for his kind of uniformity amidst variety, that you needed something recognizably as a pattern, but also something different to surprise you. And there's a guy we had came in and did a lecture at school a few years ago who talked about music and was analyzing structures within music and like the kind of regularity of it. And he played, something incredibly repetitive and structured, like, the kind of the, like EDM music or something like that, or just like a metronome. Like, that's not fun to listen to because it's just boring and repetitive. And then something like mad freeform jazz without any structure at all, that's not fun for most people to listen to because there's nothing recognizable in it. But if you analyze the kind of the structure of the music, the sort of the sweet spot, and he did it mathematically, he kind of showed the formula to do it, and then popped up all of the like sort of best selling kind of like biggest hits from like the last like 50 years, and they all had mathematically within a very narrow number. They were really close. So like everything from like the Beatles to Nirvana to like all these different musical genres, like Eminem and Dre and kind of more contemporary stuff, like nothing in common generally you would think listening to them. But when you pared it down into the how much regularity, how much variety, they were all actually really close together, which is interesting.
I find it really interesting when I was helping my kids revise for their theory of music exams, because one of the questions is you get 2 bars of music and you have to write the next 6 bars. So you have to write an 8-bar piece of music. And to begin with, because I didn't do much theory of music, although I could play music and read music and I love music, I hadn't done much. And I was like, but how can these have a right answer? And the answer is because, like, they can, because music is maths. And if you start here, then in the rules of music, the Western rules of music, like if, it should end on the tonic or whatever. And it's only when you know that you can then make that conscious decision to not end on the tonic for a particular effect. Except that's not true, because loads of people write music intuitively. They don't know how to read music. They've never done any music theory of music, but they write amazing, brilliant music. And I find music so fascinating that it's like this mathematical science that is intuitive to humans. And to begin with, you're like, but how can that be? But then I'm like, well, when you catch a ball, your brain is essentially doing mathematical equations on the fly to work out where your hand should go. So we actually all are intuitive, creative mathematicians in a really fascinating way.
And it applies to writing as well. Like the biggest bugbear as an English teacher, and you get it both from pupils and also frustratingly sometimes from visiting authors, is when pupils are like, oh yeah, but did the writer really mean that when you're analysing something? Or when you get an author who comes in and says, oh, I didn't really mean that. I just wrote it. It just sounded nice. I didn't think about the connotations. And you're like, no, you didn't consciously think about the connotations, but you have read and written and spoken your whole life. You have learned how language worked, and you knew that that was the right word. And you maybe didn't stop and think, oh, that's the right word because of these connotations, but you knew that that was the right word. So analysing all those connotations, it isn't about authorial intent. It isn't about what you intended. It's about the effect of the language on the reader, and that is an objective thing that people can kind of pick up. And if you think about it logically when you're younger and kind of learn it, it will become intuitive, and some people just get it without being taught it, and some people need that little nudge. Can you tell that touched the nerve? So reliving the frustration. I remember having authors coming in and just being like, "Oh yeah, I just make it up. There's nothing to do that," and you're like, "Shut up! Stop talking."
Here's another few quick fire questions.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Kevin asks, do you have notebooks, etc., to keep track of ideas when not at the desk?
Always.
Do you, Mark? Post-it notes.
Love it.
Yeah, lots of post-it notes everywhere. I do have notepads and stuff as well. I don't tend to do a lot of drawing when I'm not sitting down and drawing stuff. I tend to make written notes if I'm going to make notes about stuff. I tend to put words down and then can turn them into pictures later.
Muse boards for projects? I'm not really a big one for muse or mood boards.
There's you can't see now behind my computer here is a massive pin board that's got just tons of stuff all over it, but it's a bit of everything. It's a mood board as in this is a board an artist should have, but it's not. There's nothing on it that's particularly focused to what I'm doing right now. I mean, there's a skull cod piece in the middle of it for some reason. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Tech asks, here's another quickfire one. We've got a few more minutes left. Are there any particular projects you hope to do at some point in the future? Loads.
Always, yes. Yeah. Several. There's always like half a dozen on the go at various stages of development. Some I've set aside for years now in the hope that I'll one day get back to them. Others are a little bit more current, but there's always.
Yeah, for sure.
But we're not going to tell you what they are in case we do decide to do
no.
Them. 101 Colonel says, does it have pictures of enemies with pins in them? You're bored.
I don't. There's no enemies up there. No, because I don't want to be looking at my enemies constantly.
No,
there's some friends with pins in them.
Suejan asks, and we don't really have time to actually physically do this, but we could maybe do something like this in a future episode. Can you each give a tour through your library of books or other resources for creative inspiration or world building research? Do you use them each in different ways and how? So is anyone up for that in future?
That'd be cool at some point.
I'll have to
dust. I will have to dust. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Oh, it probably, like, how good's your camera? It probably won't pick up dust. Like, well, focus again. There we go.
I'll have to move around with it, won't I suppose?
And there's a couple.
So you can bring stuff to the camera, I guess. That's what I'm thinking. Because most of my stuff is in another room, and I'm not taking a camera in that room because it's an absolute dump. So yeah.
I think we'll come back. We'll keep this one for a future one, Drunken Mystic Iron Lung, and the same for this one, making up NPCs and duplicates.
Oh yeah. Yes, because I'm working on that now. Actually, putting together effectively a an adventuring party, and ensuring that each character is unique, but also interacts and aligns nicely with every other character. So yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, so Zergish, thank you. We will come back to that and make a bigger stream about preset character builds, making in unique PCs, avoiding duplicates, etc. But the last question for today is going to be from Sotek. So when you're about to begin a new project, is there any kind of ritual or sequence you go through in preparation to begin, or do you just belly flopping?
I mean, it depends. For me, it depends on the project, I think. Like sometimes you're a hired gun, right? Like sometimes you're like, I need you to write 600 words about this. Okay, great. I'm just going to do that. And like if it's, if you're playing someone else's IP, I think that there needs to be more of that preparation, because like when we were doing Ubersreich, like Ubersreich existed. There was the Fat Shark games, there was the 3rd edition Wolfrup games, and we had to kind of acknowledge that. So there was a research process where we had to be like, right, okay, what's already established? What can we use? What do we ignore? What can we change? Where if it's something that we're just doing ourselves, like that process is going to be different, because we're like, well, what do we want to make, and why do we want to make it? And that's a whole different kettle of fish.
Yeah, I try to have a sort of clean up. I try to sort of clean my desk, clean my space, sort of clean my brain a little bit at the start of a project. Doesn't always work. Yeah,
you see,
yeah.
a dirty mind.
But there's a little bit of housekeeping, I suppose. I would describe it.
If it was a big project, I'd probably get a new notebook. I'd definitely try to tidy up and make turn over a new leaf, both notebook-wise and life-wise.
Yeah, mess and mayhem increases over the course of a project. So when you come to the end of something, as much as just draw a line over what's gone before, right, now I'm going to clean up and we'll start again. And then very, very quickly things get messy and mayhemic once again. But at least make the gesture of starting with a fresh slate.
Today, I don't have my headphones, so I'm just coming through the laptop speakers, and I thought you said meth and mayhem.
Occasionally, yeah.
Yeah, it's like, okay.
Well, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of our hour. And thanks to everyone who pre-submitted questions. Thanks to those who joined us in the comments. We'll be back next week for another caw inside the Rookery. But until then, thanks Andy, thanks Mark, thanks as always to all of our patrons and our lovely Discord community who send us questions and send us money. Yay!
Until the next time.
Yep. Yeah. Caw. See you soon.
Draw.